Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's National Press Club address, Westpac Address. I'm Chris Uhlmann. Thank you for joining us. And you can follow us online if you are at #NPC, and our handle is @PressClubAUST. Well, I'm delighted to welcome the Treasurer, Scott Morrison. He's had some many difficult jobs in government and he's enjoyed some success. As Immigration Minister, of course, he said he would stop the boats, and he did. But perhaps that task is matched by what he has to do now, at a time when revenue is shrinking and spending is historically high. He's Treasurer, and he started a conversation where every galah in the pet shop is talking about tax. That conversation continues today. Will you please welcome Scott Morrison?
Well, thank you very much, Chris. It's a great pleasure to be back here again today, and particularly in this new role as Treasurer. It was about a year ago where I addressed you as the Social Services Minister and talked about a number of very important things that were happening in our community, in our society, and I'm pleased that as the course of that year went through, that we were able to act on many of the things that were outlined in that presentation on that day, and today is no different. I think you all know that I have a fairly candid and upfront sort of approach to life and politics, and today I will be speaking to you to set out the economic and fiscal context of this year's budget. Now, in 3 months' time, I will come back here and I'll be talking to you about what was actually in the budget. That day is not today. That day is in 3 months' time. But in 3 months' time, that will all be out for us all to pore over. But today, the job, and I'm joined here by a number of my colleagues who I'll come to in a second, our job today is to set out that economic and fiscal context for the budget that we're preparing. That was always the purpose of coming here today, to set out what some of the pressures are, the principles that we're following and the purposes of the budget, and to explain, I think, some of the processes that we've been engaged with over the last several months. Now, I've been doing that as a part of a very strong team, of course, with the Prime Minister, but of course Matthias Cormann, as the Minister for Finance, has been an outstanding Minister for Finance, and he and I are a very close team, particularly as we work together on the budget, and it's a thrill to work with Matthias, and I commend him on all the great work he's done in a very tough gig. And he and I are joined, of course, by Kelly O'Dwyer, the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Small Business, and Kelly is a key part of our economic team, and you've heard from her just a few weeks ago, and where she's been leading the charge on issues, particularly around multinational tax, and I'll touch on that briefly today as well. Alex Hawke is the Assistant Minister to the Treasurer, and he has responsibilities that actually extend far and wide in the portfolio, assisting me in the various responsibilities. And together, this is the economic team working to the Prime Minister to ensure that we frame the economic policy and narrative which can give and continue to give Australians the confidence in the economic management the government is providing. Now, I'm pleased that I'm joined also today by a number of other colleagues. I particularly want, and he's on his way, I understand, the new Minister for Human Services to be sworn in this week, Alan Tudge. I want to really congratulate Alan on his elevation to the ministry. It's thoroughly deserved. He's done an outstanding job in the area of social policy more generally. I worked with him when I was Social Services Minister, and to see him coming into that role, I really commend him for that. Equally, Angus Taylor, Consultant at Large now to the Prime Minister, in his new role as Parliamentary Secretary, and if he does as good a job as he did for McKinsey's for us in this role, then I think he will add a lot of value, and it's great to see you as part of the team, Angus. And to Senator Zelja, it's always great to have a close colleague and friend here, and I thank you for being here in this presentation. When I was thinking about the presentation today, which is I've titled Backing Australians in Our Transitioning Economy, it reminded me of an experience I had some years ago, about over 10 years ago, in New Zealand, where Jenny and I lived for a period of time. And we became very good friends with this American fellow and his wife. She was a New Zealander, and he was an American. And, you know, Americans are a funny bunch. They say all sorts of things all the time, have a nice day and all that sort of thing, and Australians sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable about the sort of exuberance of Americans on occasions. And sometimes we think that, you know, they're just lines and it's not really meant and all the rest of it. But this bloke was a guy called Clay. Clay Nelson was his name, and he remains a good friend to this day. Now, Clay was from a little town in Texas called Texarkana, and that is on the border of Arkansas and Texas. And he came from a real southern family. His father is allegedly the first Elvis impersonator in history, because when Elvis came and played at their little town, and he was little known, his father, who was actually not a bad musician, Clay tells me his dad was actually better than Elvis, but he carried on the performances in the venue, because I don't think Elvis ever came back and played at that venue again. And this was the sort of bloke, these sort of good old boys down there, they would invest in conservation programs in Alaska because they were duck shooters in Texas. And they would literally were ensuring that the stock for the shoot a little later on the year was well replenished. And their other great, as Clay would have a million of these stories, but their other idea of pulling pranks on each other, that his dad and his mates, was they would put live alligators in each other's hunting cabins. So this was Clay Nelson, great bloke. But Clay had a saying that he always used to say to people, and he was in sales, surprisingly, and Clay would sit down with a client or with a mate or a friend or whatever, and the first thing he'd always say to you was, "How can I help you win today?" Now, when you've heard that for the first time, you sort of recoiled a bit as an Aussie and said, "Oh, that's a bit full on, that's a bit much. Does the guy really mean it?" Now, we became very good friends, and I know he meant every single word of it, and that was his business practice. Every single deal he went into, every relationship he had, he took that attitude of how can I help the person on the other side of that table win today. Now, in Australia, if I was to translate Clay's Texarkana, "How can I help you win today?" I'd say, "How can I back you in today? How can I back you in? You're out there trying to make something happen. How can I, as Treasurer, how can the government back you in terms of what you're doing and what you're hoping to achieve?" And that's our job. That's what we're trying to do as the Turnbull government. We know that Australians are out there every single day transforming and transitioning our economy. They're out there, as I've said, working hard, earning, paying taxes on what they're earning, they're saving for their future, and they're investing in the opportunities that are out there. And these are the Australians that are the key to jobs and growth in this country. These are the Australians that are actually going to make the difference for my children, our children, future generations. It's the people who are out there earning that we really have to focus on in terms of economic policy and how we pitch and frame our tax system, how we pitch and frame our programs, those who are making that difference. Now, as we think about that challenge, I've got a few charts which I wanted to run through today. There are a number of things we have to do as we frame the budget. The first is, our starting point is we have to have a very candid assessment of the global and domestic economic circumstances, the environment which we're seeking to frame this budget. And our philosophy is that you can better target and control the things you can control in economic policy if you have a better understanding of the things that you can't control. And so while we can't control what's happening globally at the moment, a good understanding of what's happening can really help us frame what we can control is what we pull together in the budget. Now, as we know, markets have been extremely volatile since the Christmas period. As people sit at home, they've been watching that on their screens, they've been watching that around the place, and that would undoubtedly cause a bit of anxiety in terms of what is occurring. And you're all familiar with these numbers. Now, if you put it in a historical context, what we've seen in the last month, we've seen before, and not as drastic terms as we've seen in the past. But I think there's no doubt that there has been quite a lot of volatility, and that continues to this day, and it's likely not over yet. There have been major movements in commodity prices, particularly in oil prices. We've seen major movements in both supply and the price of oil around the world. That's one of the factors. But I haven't seen anyone yet who's been able to stand in front of, whether it's a lectern like this or in front of a Bloomberg's camera or a CNBC, and give an absolute exposition as to what is actually going on. And the first person, I think, to tell you that they know all of that will be the first person that I think you should be moving on to the next person with. Now, cheap money has also been a big part of what we've been seeing happening globally. Quantitative easing now has been around for a while, and while the morphine may have arguably been good for the patient at the time, that morphine is proving hard to kick. And we've seen, particularly in markets in recent times, that any movements, one way or the other, on these issues has caused very jittery responses around the globe. And it's also important to make the point that longer term Treasury yields have also been affected in a similar way. So both the short and long-term costs of borrowing, money is a lot cheaper than it used to be, and that has become one of the new norms in the global environment. Global growth downgrades have become a fairly regular feature. There's no great shock in all of that, and the purpose of this chart, which goes through the various IMF's forecasts going back a number of years, has shown where those lines have been moving now for some time. And it's the oldest sort of, I suppose, treasurer's gag in the world that an economist's prediction is basically a mistake between 2 points. And forecasting is not perfect, and I'm not about to give anyone a lecture on the accuracy or otherwise of their forecasts. But if you look at the trend, what we are seeing is that there has been a conditioning now to a much lower growth environment around the world. And that has been happening particularly in response to particular large economies. As you can see there, Australia has been no stranger to that trend, and that is the environment in which we live. Turning to China in particular, I wanted to say a little bit about China. When I was at the A50 event with Citibank recently, as Andrew Robert tells me there was some 16 trillion or odd funds under management in the room on that day. Alex was there that day. I think Matthias had been there as well. Arthur Sinodis had been there. They were quite surprised to learn about the depth and the sophistication and the diversity of our engagement with China. They had been seeing, I think, Australia as having a fairly one-dimensional relationship with China around resources. But the truth, as we all know, is quite different to that. And the fact that China is slowing down is a bit like predicting tomorrow morning's sunrise. There's no great shock about that. That has been conditioned and factored in now for some time. But the obvious arithmetic point is continually lost. And that is a growth rate in China at just below 7% was worth well over 10% a number of years back, and well over 14% when you go back 70 years or so. And so it's growing off a much larger base, and the volume of growth coming out of China still provides great opportunities for our economy, and it's something to be the most excited treasurer to be at this time as an Australian, to paraphrase another great Australian. So when we look at the issue of China, there remains good, strong opportunity. Their economy, like ours, is transitioning. For the first time, as you can see on the chart, more than 50% of the Chinese economy is now in services. It is undergoing the transformation from production to consumption. So the parts of our economy which were really benefiting from the production phase of the economy, particularly in the resources sector, and as Josh was speaking to you earlier in the week, he kindly sent me a note the other day. He did the warm-up and the crowd's ready. And what he would have explained to you as well is the production volumes and market share into China continues to grow for our resources sector, so it remains strong. But as we move from the production phase to the consumption phase of the Chinese economy, what we're seeing is the areas of our economy that are growing are sinking with that. So as we get some 1 million extra middle-class consumers coming into the Chinese market, that's a positive thing for us. That's a real positive thing for us in terms of education and tourism and other service exports and health services and ageing services and all of these things which are also facilitated by our great free trade agreements. So this change in China is happening. It's a positive thing and it's something we're well positioned and aligned to. Things are volatile in China, and even just this morning we got the report of the massive surge in financing, setting a new record in China, up over 525 billion US. And that, I think, is a real sign of what's happening there and continues to happen there. And I think we can take some encouragement out of that in terms of their medium-term positioning. And the issue I'd make about China is that as they seek to deal with issues, they're seeking to deal with the issues as they see them and dealing with them in the way that they wish to deal with them. I mean, the Chinese economy and its institutions and its regulators and all of these things, I'll be going up to the G20 at the end of the next week. And one of the messages, I think, positive messages we can have about what's happening in China is they are working through their own institutional evolution. We can't expect all of the central institutions of many of these economies to respond in exactly the same way they would in Western countries. They've got a different history, they're going on a different path, but they're all trying to get to the same place. So we see what China is doing. They're seeking to manage their currency, and they're doing that against the TWI. They're not doing it against the US dollar, and you can see that in the chart there as they're keeping it in that range of plus or minus 3%, I think it is there. And they're also trying to do it with the outflow of capital from China, and they're using their own methods to try and control that. Now, there'll be others who will commentate on whether that's the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it. But these are issues that they're identifying that they are working through, and our job as a good friend of China is, I think, to support them in the evolution of their institutions and their regulatory processes, because we have the same objective in mind, and that is to bring stability to these markets as governments wherever we can. And look, they have more options than most. Their reserve ratio is still got lots of room to move. Their central bank rates still have lots of room to move, and definitely much more so than they have in the United States or Europe. And the one thing you can always bank on with China is they are committed to growth. That's the one thing you can absolutely bank on, because economic growth is at the core of that country's social, political and economic stability. And they will do what they need to do to ensure growth in their economy, and that's good news for every Australian, because every Australian will share in the continued growth of the Chinese economy. What's happening at home? Well, we're growing and we are transitioning. From a growth point of view, although at 2.5% that's below the long-term trend, you've got to start asking what the long-term trends are, I think, in this new global economic environment. But we are doing better than all the key economies in the OECD. This is good news. We have got good growth, both in absolute and relative terms. And that growth is both forecast and projected to improve, not just by Treasury, but also the RBA and others. Our economic transition is well underway, just as it is in China. I've already touched on that. In terms of the growth in our services as we move away from the mining investment boom stage into a new, more diversified economy. Things that are really growing are areas of social services in particular, and I touched on that, I think, last time I was here. These are areas of great growth, employment and advancement for the Australian economy. Consumption has been strong. We noticed that in the most recent national accounts. Confidence and business conditions, regardless of who's surveying them, remain positive. And as the Westpac Institute survey showed just recently, there are more optimists than there are pessimists about the Australian economy out there amongst consumers. And that's a good thing. And I can tell you that the government is one of those optimists, and so am I and the Prime Minister and the rest of the team. Our labour market is strong, over 300,000 jobs created last year. And what we're seeing with the growth, although it's at 2.5%, which is lower than the long-term average, it is far more job-intensive growth. For every inch of growth that we're gaining at the moment in this new economy, we are getting more jobs per inch. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And it's something we can... I know banks in particular, as they think about their lending books, are always encouraged, and the figure they most look at most closely is the rate of unemployment, which has now been under 6 now for some months. But backing this transition couldn't be more critical to jobs and growth, because what this chart shows is the gap. And what you can see with the red bars there and the arrow, that is the non-resources component of expenditure. That's what has to make up the gap as the mining investment has fallen. Now, we've seen mining investment, and it's just got a pointer. If it doesn't really matter. You can see you can see on the non-resources expenditure where the purple is illustrated there on the chart. You can see in the bar just before that and the bar just after that that we've seen the pit, if you like, predicted of what is happening with the mining investment side of the resources investment side of things, and that will, have a mixed performance over the next few years. But the thing that is making up the difference in the growth dividend is what is happening in the non-mining sector of the economy. So the diversification is critical to supporting jobs and growth in the future, and that's why we need to back it in. But the need for productivity, innovation and incentive in our economy has never been more important. Because when you look at the componentry of growth in our economy, what is contributing to real national income per person, what you could see in the earlier years, particularly in the period in the 1990s is the overwhelming majority of what was driving national income growth was actually labour productivity and productivity. Now, that was coming out of the back of a recession, and there was a lot of reforms that were taking place over that period. And beyond that, that was supported in the subsequent position of a very strong terms of trade period, which was also contributing to national income growth. Going forward, the terms of trade support that we've seen previously is not expected to be there. It's gone to the other side of the line, and that means where we have had a labour productivity around 1.5% over the last 5 years, just to maintain national income at the levels of where the shaded bar is would require that to be at around 2.4%. So there has never been a more important time to focus on innovation, productivity and incentive in our economy. That is critical to backing Australians in as we transition in this new economy, in our new economy. And there are a number of things, of course, the government has announced and is doing that bring together a national plan for economic growth and jobs. Of course, there is the outstanding record of the trade and investment agenda we have been pursuing over the last few years, and at this time I'd like to really take the opportunity, I'm sure colleagues would join me in praising the work of our finest ever Trade Minister in Andrew Robb, who has spearheaded that charge and delivered generations of prosperity for Australians from his great work. And I want to thank Andrew on behalf of myself and other colleagues here for the tremendous work he has done. But this is about the government seeking out opportunities in this new economy. Our National Infrastructure Plan, around $50 billion being rolled out to support productive capacity in our economy. The work we've done post-Harper and are now working closely with the states to usher in a new set of Hilmer-like reforms to be Harper-like reforms to boost productivity by fixing the things that need to be fixed in state and Commonwealth government service delivery and improving the competitiveness of our human services delivery around the country. This is critical microeconomic reform for the country's future, and it's something that will seriously underpin our ability to maintain and improve national incomes going forward. Innovation plans were announced last year by Christopher Pyne and the Prime Minister, and this has been a real culture shifter. The innovation plan, at a time of great fiscal pressure, to put the $1 billion in to backing innovation through the measures that are contained in those measures, whether it's the investment in research capacity, whether it's the investment in bridging the funding gap and supporting angel investing and those other many measures, all of that has been designed to signal to the Australian economy that we back innovation. And this has been a signature reform of the Prime Minister, and it has really boosted confidence in those key areas of our economy. Innovation is the key to productivity. Doesn't matter what business you're in, doesn't matter what government you're in. Innovation must impact all of our operations, and the Prime Minister has set that out. But it's also, frankly, from my point of view, the most important reason why we have to bring back the ABCC. The abolition of the ABCC was a productivity killer in the building and construction industry and a job destroyer in the building and construction industry. Our economy can't afford the indulgence of union grandstanding on the ABCC and Labor grandstanding on that. This is an important economic reform that must be passed by this parliament, and it's necessary to boost jobs and growth. Forget the politics of unions and the Labor Party and all that. It's important for jobs and growth. That's why we put it in there. When it was put in place, the ABCC, it improved performance in the building and construction industry. That's an established fact. And when it was taken away, we see the old practices revert. Australia can't afford not to have the ABCC, and it must be returned. But when we do all of these things, there's got to be in it something for the people who are making the effort. There really has to be. There needs to be a dividend for those who are making this extra effort in this new economy, which is actually causing the transition to take place. The tax system must be growth-friendly. It must be earner-friendly. It must be profit-friendly. It must be friendly to the things that actually transform our economy and pay people's wages and end up enabling the government to raise revenue from those earnings. Earners are the ones who need to benefit from the growth in our economy because they're the ones who drive it. Now, what this chart shows is part of the information that was released, that I released last week, of Treasury modelling on the impact of rising average tax rates from 24% in 16-17 up to 26.6% in 2021. What you can see in that chart there is there have been periods of time in the blue where we've been able to ease those average tax rates. But we're now in the red phase, where if we do nothing at all to the tax on what people earn, it will go up and up and up. And that is a job killer and it's a growth killer. This has been the issue that has been driving the Prime Minister and I and the rest of the economic team as we've been engaging the issues of tax. It is the job-destroying nature of rising average tax rates that needs to be compensated in this economy if we're to have growth. That's the compensation that is frankly most necessary for our economy. Those who will be working harder and for a reward in their effort, they will be given higher taxes if we do nothing. The top 20% of income tax payers pay 60% of what's collected. The top 2% pay far more than that, so pay a disproportionate share as well. Tax and spend is not a plan for jobs and growth. It's simply not a plan for jobs and growth. And that's what the Treasury modelling showed. It showed that as these taxes continue to rise, that there will be a drag on growth of some 0.55% of GDP. And the spending that can be funded by that only makes up 0.2 of it. So if anyone thinks that higher taxes to support higher spending is a pathway to prosperity, you're dreaming. And this government isn't dreaming. This government is driven by hard realities of what those numbers say. And it's very important that we heed those lessons. The scope for tax reform is limited in this economy. We don't have a surplus to fund reductions in taxes. We weren't bequeathed one by the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government, strangely enough. That didn't happen. We don't have the rivers of money that come from rising commodity prices or high levels of nominal GDP growth, which has been present on other occasions. If we want to reduce taxes in one area, then we have to look at tax mix in other areas. And so what did we do? It would have been quite easy, frankly, in October and November of last year for the Prime Minister and I to say, no, we're not going to do the tax mix switch. We're not going to do the GST. The politics of that is no stranger to anyone in this room. It's obvious. The politics of doing that would be incredibly hard. You don't get a politics prize for working that out. The fact that we actually decided, knowing that, to seriously look at whether this would produce a boost in growth and could be implemented to deliver a dividend for mums and dads and others who are out there experiencing these higher average tax rates, I think is a credit to the government. We actually resisted the temptation to rule things in and rule things out as others have in the past on the basis of politics. We were prepared to wear the very generously intended advice that we got from people around the country about how we should be dealing with this. And we focused on doing the work with the Treasury. And we looked at what could be done and would it work. And the results were released last week. On the best possible scenario in terms of maximising the increase in the cuts in personal income tax that would come from a tax mix switch of a rise in the GST to 15%. The best, with a compensation bill of just $6 billion, which only dealt with the indexation of transfer payments. So that was not the government's preferred option. What we wanted to model is if you maximise the level of personal income tax cuts, how good would the growth dividend be? And at best, it was between 0 and 0.3%, at best. Now, you've got to add to that the reality of then seeking to implement something. And in implementing that arrangement, of course, the compensation bill would have had to have been higher than $6 billion, just to deal with independent retirees and others directly not influenced by the tax or transfer system. That would have been another $2 billion to start with. But by the time you got through the Senate, by the time everyone else had lined up for compensation, you would have been at a figure approaching $16 billion or so. And that's 1% of GDP on top of outlays. Even at 8%, it was 0.5% of GDP on outlays. And for me, this was terribly troubling. And so on balance, the Prime Minister, I and the Cabinet decided that this was not a goer. that it was not go for launch. It was something that had to be put away. And so this government will not be taking a GST increase to the next election. The times are not right for that. And this government would never seek to change the GST unless we put it to the Australian people first. What we've done in this process, I think, is be very upfront with Australians. We looked at it. We considered it. We did our homework. We assessed it. We put up with all the criticism and the flack and the noise and the tumult because we wanted to make the right decision for the country. Had it been the right decision, then we would have done it. And what I think the Australian people can take comfort from as we continue to work through all the other issues that are germane to this, then we will apply the same level of discipline and we will do what's right for jobs and growth. And we will do what's right and we will continue to be motivated by trying to support those people who are paying higher and higher levels of personal income taxes for the simple reason that they decide to go to work every day and try to do the right thing by this country. And these are the people who are foremost in my mind when it comes to these tax issues. Now, of course, there are other issues that we have to deal with in tax. In multinational tax, Kelly would have outlined that a couple of weeks ago and I won't go over that again. We have our multinational anti-avoidance laws in place. They're in place. The Tax Commissioner made some very strong statements at estimates the other week and I would refer you to all of those. We're deadly serious about going after this, but rather than talking about it, we're doing it. And we've put the laws in place. We had the digital services and products legislation introduced to the House just last week. I did that. That is also now in train, which is another way to ensure that you're capturing the revenue at point of sale from multinational companies. And we're also progressing well the issues of the low value threshold when it comes to online purchase of tangible goods from offshore. So we're getting about that issue. But if anyone thinks, even on the Labor Party's numbers, of $1.9 billion for their preferred measure, that compares to, if you were considering the GST, to $35 billion. So if anyone thinks you can actually solve the tax issues in this country with that measure, well, the numbers just don't stack up. They don't stack up. And we've looked at areas where possibly we could have gone, which were of much greater size and scale, and we've come to the decision for the reasons I've said. So the tax mix, which was a threshold question, we've resolved that. We now need to go and work through the many other issues that have been on the agenda, and we will do that in the same way we've dealt with the GST and in the budget. And if there's opportunities to do that prior to that, we'll obviously consider that. But our timing will be based on ensuring that the work is ready and the work is done and the answer is the right one for Australia. Now, what all that means at the end of the day is that we need to address that in the budget context. What we've found is that the only way to have lower taxes is to have lower expenditure. The tax mix switch is not going to solve that problem at that scale. The only way we can deliver longer-term relief for people out there earning every day is to deal with the issue of expenditure. I was asked the question in the House, when will we achieve a surplus? And I said, when expenditure is less than revenue. And there's an import in what I said, because others may seek to achieve a surplus by ensuring revenue is higher than expenditure. So you can have a surplus at any number, provided your revenue's higher. And this government is intending to try and achieve a surplus through that method and restore us to that position which was held when we were last in government, but to do it by getting expenditure under control. Now, there's some challenges in doing that as we face the budget. The nominal growth and real GDP growth have converged in recent times. And as we know, nominal GDP growth largely reflects earnings for the country. And so the impacts of trade weighted index and the impact of commodity prices, the impact of low wage growth, the impact of company profits being modest, all of that is impacting on what is happening in terms of what has come in over the last few years and what has been projected to come in and therefore hasn't. The uncertain times, though, that we face means that financial strength matters in how we respond to these issues. And we believe that you're more likely to turn $1 that you have into $2 than if the government keeps it. We're more likely to turn it into 50 cents. And that's true at a federal level as it is at a state level or a local government level. Our view about the budget is that we want to put as much money in your hands to do the best thing you want to do with it, rather than keeping it in ours. And this is the reason why getting your expenses and your revenue measures in better sync. But of course, we've had to deal with the issues of nominal GDP. We've had to deal with the flattening of those forecasts as time has come in, and you've seen that happen in the various statements going back to PFO as that line has continued to lean over and to flatten. And the set of revised estimates that we provide in mid-December showed that yes, we're on the right trajectory as expenditure to GDP falls from 25.9% to 25.3%. The deficit does continue to shrink over that period of time based on far more realistic, I think, assessments and projections of what economic growth is. I should remind you that in my EFO, the biggest impact on revenue was actually not commodity prices. It was the government deciding to blow the whistle on forward projections on growth. And we revised it down from 3.5 to 3. That was the biggest impact on revenue. It wasn't all the other things. It was us calling it out ourselves, because we think as you prepare a budget, you've got to give the most candid assessment you can of these measures that are going to frame it. And you know, over the last number of years, what has happened is that we've actually done quite a good job at least keeping expenditure where it is. And the thing that has really changed has been those forecasts of nominal GDP growth, which you can see have fallen from 5.25 down to 2.75. What you've seen is receipts fall fairly dramatically from what was previously forecast. But we are basically spending this year what PFO said would be spent, and that's in nominal terms. So in real terms, it's actually a bit better. The work that Matthias had done as Finance Minister to make sure that we held the line has been extraordinary. We haven't spent more than we've saved. We haven't done that. And that has been an enormous effort to achieve that. Of course, the budget and the overall position of the balance has been impacted by those movements in revenue. But I wouldn't want you for a second to think that that means we've got a revenue problem, because that's what the next chart shows. It shows we might have had a forecasting problem. We might have had a projections problem on revenue, but revenue is substantially not the problem. And if you look at this chart, what it shows is that most of the work bringing the budget back to balance over the next few years is actually being done by revenue, by those income taxpayers paying higher rates of average tax every single year. They're the ones in paying more tax, which is actually lifting that revenue line, and that revenue line beyond the forward estimates is projected at the moment to get up to about 25.8%. So anyone who thinks we need to increase taxes in net terms because we've got a revenue problem with the budget clearly hasn't seen that chart. That red line is going up. Next year, it will exceed the long-term average for revenue in this country over the last 30 years. But notice the blue line. It is still above the long-run average on expenditure. It is still above that. Over the last 2 years, we have saved, and when we talk about savings, we mean savings. We don't mean taxes increases. When we talk about revenue, that's tax increases. When we talk about savings, it actually deals with expenditure. We have saved over $80 billion. But we've also had new spending of more than $70 billion. And we've also cut taxes on the mining tax and the carbon tax, which means that after these last couple of years, we are basically in the same position that we were 2 years ago. Now, it would have been far worse if that new spending pressures had come through and we hadn't been able to offset that with the savings that has been achieved. And again, I pay tribute to Matthias's work and the team on that. But after $80 billion of savings, we've respent over $70 billion. And this is the real task for the budget going forward. And it just doesn't apply to the Commonwealth. It applies to the states as well. Asking for buckets of money doesn't solve your expenditure problem. And it doesn't solve it for the Commonwealth. And there's no licence for any treasurer to go around asking the public for more buckets of money when we're asking them to work harder every day. That's not how this deal works in this country. If we can make savings, if we can deliver changes in the tax system, then it's designed to actually reduce the taxes being paid by people who are working as hard as they are today. And that's our focus as we move through the process of changing tax systems as well as dealing with the budget as well. To give a bit of context, I think, in all of this, every consolidation that takes place of the budget over time deals with different circumstances. In our circumstances over recent years, we've obviously dealt with lower levels of nominal GDP growth that has occurred at other times. But our pace of fiscal consolidation in this low growth environment around the world has been a much tougher road. And that's not going to change in the years ahead. We are continuing to be faced by the sorts of economic global circumstances that I was outlining at the start of this presentation. And the message in that is this is a long road. Our fiscal challenge that we inherited, there is no quick fix to it. There is no one statement. There is no one budget. There are budgets and budgets and budgets and budgets that are required to fix that problem. There is no one measure. There is no one thing. It is just the hard drilling through boards, as Henry Ergas was saying, of ensuring we get this back in the right position. Now, this government is up for that because we've demonstrated that we're prepared to save money where we can and we're prepared to cut taxes. We've done both of those things as a government, and the Turnbull government is committed to that as well. In 3 months, I will deliver the first budget of the Turnbull government, and that budget will have that as its philosophy. That as its philosophy. So we have to learn to do more with less. We have to learn to spend better, not more. These are the tasks not just for the federal budget but for state budgets as well. Just because someone walks into your office in a business and says they have an 8% increase in their costs does not mean you have to turn around and give them a cheque. That does not happen in business. You were told to reduce that cost estimate by innovation, by change, by doing things differently, by working the problem. Asking for a bucket of money from the taxpayer should not be an option for any government in this country. If we look around the world, other countries have been doing the same thing. They've been looking to consolidate. And we're basically on line just below Canada, but I remind everyone that we're growing at twice the rate of Canada at the moment. So we are in the pack when it comes to fiscal consolidation. We're not laggards or we're not leaders necessarily on that front. But let's not forget that in the United States and in other countries, particularly the UK, they are starting from a long way behind. And they came out of a crisis in the North Atlantic that was far more deeply felt in their country than certainly was the case here, where we had a very different experience, and the reform measures that followed. What this chart shows is that when it comes to the size of government, particularly central government, countries like New Zealand and the United Kingdom are far bigger than us. And even when you include the states, our government as a share of the economy is very competitive with other sizes of government around the world. Now, I'm always cautious to make those comparisons because it's a bit like on debt. On debt, our debt to GDP is low compared to other countries, if you measure it by that standard, but the coalition measures it by a different standard. We think the debt to GDP is too high by coalition standards, and that's why we'll do the work on expenditure restraint to ensure that we can continually work to improve the budget position over the years ahead. The areas that we need to focus on are pretty obvious, the big ones that are growing fast, and that's where we have been focusing a lot of our attention. And we also need to be very mindful of the fact that we need to address the welfare and tax linkages in this country. Now, there isn't that much time between now and the budget to be able to get into those rather large and weighty issues, but they are very big issues for the country. It is true today that many Australians growing up will see transfer payments as a normal part of their income. That probably wasn't true many years ago when others were growing up. It has now become part of the middle class of Australia, that transfer payments are part of the income. One of the big issues that we actually had to deal with when we looked at the issues around compensation on the GST. There are just more people who are getting payments these days. And that is a big factor when you're trying to come up with a compensation bill. And these things can be a very big disincentive to work. But I touched on that last time I was here, and I won't go down that path again today, but it will be a topic for another time. So in conclusion, there is a long road ahead. This is test match, not 2020 Big Bash when it comes to fixing the budget and to improving the budget. It requires test match patience. It requires test match tactics. It takes test match endurance. It takes a real clear understanding about what your principles are. The players you've got to back in that are going to deliver the big runs and do the big innings and take the big wickets. And they're the ones who are out there earning every day. They're the ones who are working, they're saving and they're investing. And these are the ones that we want to back in We are battling strong headwinds, but the good news and the hope is that this country is battling those headwinds, I'd argue, better than any. This is the best place to be when it comes to the global economy at the moment. This is the country that is actually doing the things that are needed, and that is being led by Australians, and it's our job as a government to back that in. We need to back the earners in our economy who are out there working, saving and investing. Thank you for your attention.